And welcome, everybody. It's Sunday. It's another respect. And once again, tonight, we're going to take a deep dive into that cesspool of child trafficking and child abuse. And I know a lot of you out there are saying, why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep going back to this? It's a morose subject. It's really hard on all of us to listen to. And that's the reason that I keep going back to it. This is an important subject, and it's something that needs to remain in the forefront of everybody's mind, because these are atrocities that were put on children. Okay, it's bad enough the abuse that some adults have to go through and the suffering that some adults have to go through. Children don't ask to be born, and when they are, they need our protection. And in many ways, that's been failed. Not just here, but all over the world. And it has to stop. And the only way that it's going to stop is if it stays in the forefront of our minds. Very, very, very important. And very, very important that we all remember that and do everything that we can to make sure it never, ever happens again. That's our job. That's my mission with this. And I hope you will support it and understand it and go forward with it. So without further ado, I want to bring on my guest for tonight, Lynne Haggerman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's just such a blessing and an honor to be on your show, Mark.
It's an honor having you. It's an honor having all of the people who have been survivors of these tragedies on the show, because it's so very, very important that we get this information out and people realize that this isn't some smokescreen. It's not some conspiracy theory. This has happened to people, and it has happened to children. And at any point in time, it could be anybody's child. And the way I've always looked at things that I've seen in my 46 years in the mainstream media, I've always gone by the saying that there, but for the grace of God, go I, because it's not me, it's not my family, it's not my child. But at any moment, it could be. So it's so important that we get this information out there. So tell us a little bit about your background in general, how you got where you are now, and then we'll delve into your experience as a child.
I was in a child trafficking ring from the time I was born until I was 5 years old. On my mother's side is generational pedophilia. Kathy O'Brien, whom I know you've had on the show many times, is a friend of mine, and she'll talk in depth about that. My mom was the one that had me go to the child trafficking ring in the neighborhood. It was actually a regional center, and you'll never hear me use the phrase child sex trafficking, because I speak to honor the little girl in me that survived and the other many children I saw that did not survive. And I speak from the little one's standpoint. Sex has nothing to do with this. That's not a concept in their mind. From a little one's mind, it's physical and mental torture. People that came to the trafficking house were law enforcement, politicians, business people, the doctor in the area, people in religious garb. Simultaneously, I was regularly taken to a U.S. University Medical Center where they have underground laboratories in the tunnels where they would experiment on the children. When I would arrive, many children each time, and they would be separated into those that had a home to go to and those who did not. And first there would be a slave auction to pedophiles. So slavery is alive and well, but it's the children. And then everyone would go underground for the experiments. So the medical university staff, the doctors, the technicians, nurses were all involved. The three-letter agencies were there. I saw them. And during that time, there was experimentation on all of the children. There was adrenochrome harvesting, which happened to me too. There was organ harvesting, rows and rows of children. These were the ones that didn't have homes to go to. And they were on medical surgical tables with tubes coming out of them, where they would have the adrenochrome harvested and the organ harvested and other forms of torture until they were, I use the word executed. I mean, no one survives that. And they didn't use anesthesia. During that whole time, I want to say God is absolutely good. He was there. I saw him all the time. I saw Jesus, angels, demons, went to heaven a lot. Still see all of that, still do. Today, fast forward, I'm an international award-winning human resource consultant. I'm an independent LifeWave distributor because that product significantly helps the PTSD and anxiety. I'm also a marathoner and a weightlifter, child of God, follower of the Lord Jesus Christ, friend of Holy Spirit. God activated me a year ago in March for such a time as this, to be a voice for the voiceless, to respect and honor the little girl in me that survived, helped other children survive, watched many, many, many not survive. And I'm here to be their voice.
Now, before we get into particulars on all of this, you're a human resource manager, you said?
Consultant. I'm a consultant. Uh-huh.
How much of a role does your history play into your choosing of employees for different companies and the way that they manage these employees?
So it makes me highly, highly successful. And I'll tell you why. Kathy O'Brien will talk about how Mark Phillips, the CIA agent that rescued her, people who survive what I survive. I have 44 times the visual acuity of others. And for me, I also have 44 times the auditory acuity. So whenever I interview someone to fill a job, I know exactly when I'm being lied to. I'm a human lie detector. I read people like a large print book under a magnifying glass. It also makes me highly successful. I do investigations, sexual harassment investigations, discrimination investigations, racial discrimination, religious, you name it. And I always, always get my man or woman because I know exactly what they're thinking, what they're not thinking, what they're about to do, when they've told me the truth, when they're lying, when they're withholding information, because I can read their nonverbals, tone of voice, what they say and they don't say. And it's from my childhood. So it makes me a phenomenal human resource consultant.
That's something that's very, very important as human resource consultant, because a lot of people do lie on their resumes and everything else, and especially when you're investigating into sexual harassment.
Yes.
The things that go on nowadays.
Yes.
But let's get back to your childhood experiences, and most of which, I won't say most of which, but a lot of which, because I know I can speak from my own experience, I don't remember anything prior to the age of 3. From the age of 3 forward, I have very vivid memories, but prior to that, I don't. I know a lot of this gets stored in your subconscious, but other than what you physically remember that you experienced, how does the stuff from being a newborn to the age of enlightenment follow you, that you can remember vividly exactly what happened?
That's another excellent question. I love your questions, Mark.
Thank you.
So whenever I turned 5 years old and I was removed from that whole situation by a simple divorce and my mom moving, and I was taken far away from it. My grandmother was there. Mom could no longer send me places, and it stopped. And at that moment, I call it the grace of God, a gift from God, but it was like a mental wipe of 95% of my memories. So I still had 5%, but 95% was gone. And God told me He kept me, my soul, my mind with Him during that whole time. And and by doing that memory wipe, it allowed me to quasi function as a semi-normal human being growing up. I always knew something was seriously, seriously wrong with me. Never could fully figure it out, but I knew it to the depths of my being. And whenever 2011 hit, I was at my makeup mirror, and all of a sudden the first repressed memory came, and it dropped me to my knees because when repressed memories come, it's the body's and mind's way of saying it's time now to remember. And I remembered a time in the crib. And when a repressed memory comes back, it's like you have a photographic memory. So I remembered exactly what I was wearing and what the perpetrator was wearing and exactly what happened. You can smell the same things. You can feel physically as if it's happening to you all over again, emotionally and mentally. You can feel it all. So I was just in a puddle on the floor. And that day I had to drive somewhere, and I was talking to God about it. And I'm like, I could have lived a lifetime without remembering that. And I looked up, which is always a good thing to do when you're in trouble. And there was a big billboard and it said, "It's never too late." So that's when the repressed memory started. And praise God, at that time I was going through a divorce. And what I didn't know was I had a counselor who was helping me, and a very godly woman whom I trust explicitly. And she was also a leading trauma therapist in the United States. I didn't know that. So praise God, she was there to help me. And she uses a technique called EMDR, which is the #1 technique for trauma, processing through trauma and getting past it, that there is right now that's available. So I've spent since 2011, I'll see her once, if not twice a week, because I have so many memories from 0 to 5 that hit, and they'll hit in the form of a body memory. And I need to remember and work through it and put it behind me. And that's how you see me now, as a person who can speak and not be in a puddle in the floor. And that's in January of last year, God said, he said, "You're ready." He said, "It's time for you to start speaking," because I've been in healing for many, many years. So that's how you remember, though, is repressed memory comes back. Typically, it first comes back as a body memory. So for example, I'll be out. So I run a lot because I'm a marathoner. So I was out one day and I saw an old washing machine that, how they used to put material clothing in and they'd hand crank out the water or some. Okay. So somebody had it as a planter, simple thing like that. And all of a sudden, bam, repressed memory. And I could no longer use my right leg. It just stopped working. And I had to drag it behind me to get myself home. And I drug it behind me until I got a few days later to my appointment to process this out with EMDR. And in that technique, my mind will remember. And then I remembered some of the torture that happened in the basement of the child trafficking house. And once I remembered and went through the whole thing, the feelings, I mean, everything comes back, then I can put it behind me. And then my legs started working again.
Wow. Wow. Because I've been going through trauma therapy with a trauma specialist for
Okay.
about 8 months,
Yeah.
trying to get to the root of certain things.
Yes.
But have been told that there's still some deep-rooted things that I'm not aware of. So I'm going to check out EMDR.
Yes.
But it is mind-boggling, the stuff that you do repress, and then sometimes how it does or doesn't come back to you. And I think that everything is, when things come back to you, they're meant to come back to you. And if they don't,
That's
they're meant
right.
not to, for a reason.
That's exactly.
For a reason. So we know, and we've been told, I shouldn't say we know, but we've been told for a very long time that rape is not a crime of passion. It's a crime of abuse and control, crime of power. It's a different mental state when you're dealing with children and that kind of abuse. And again, we're not talking just about sexual abuse here. We're talking about, like you said, adrenochrome harvesting, organ harvesting. You're talking about, and I discussed this last week with Dr. Martin when he was talking about a lot of the testing that went on and everything else. And I related it to Operation Paperclip, where the Nazis were brought over here and asked,
That's right.
how directly does this tie into Dr. Mengele?
That's right.
Who had no qualms about doing this kind of testing on people without anesthesia to, quote unquote, advanced medicine and see what kind of reactions they had, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
That kind of sick cruelty takes that kind of a sick mind, and to do that kind of experimentation on living beings,
Yes.
just on laboratory animals, but on living beings, and especially on infants.
Yes.
What does your recollection tell you about that kind of a mindset?
They are not like us. I'll start out saying that. When I was underground under the University Medical Center, everything that happened there was due to Operation Paperclip, where they did import the Nazis and they infiltrated every system that we had. So they were their mindset. They are satanic Luciferian pedophiles. They have a god, but the god that they worship is not the God that we think of, capital G-O-D. It's Satan. And they have an allegiance to him. Many of them have given him their souls. He's the father of lies. I'm sure he's promised them things that they're never going to get. But so in worship of him, they love child sacrifice. This has been going on since time began. You can read about in the Old Testament with Baal. When I was anytime there was adrenochrome harvesting, I would see Baphomet. So that's where he was kind of large and in charge, his favorite places. But the mindset of these people, it's pure evil. And the things that they do are irredeemable because they've crossed a line. For example, I love the fact that Florida has the death penalty for pedophiles and Idaho just passed it. Oklahoma passed chemical castration. I don't believe that goes far enough because there are all kinds of other things these people can do. But the analogy I use is farmers will tell you if they have a dog that for some reason gets into the chicken coop and kills a chicken, it flips their mind and makes them just insane with a lust for chicken blood. And there's nothing that can be done to stop it. So they have to put the dog down. They don't want to, but they have to stop the death of the chickens. So it's the same thing with the pedophile. They never seek therapy or treatment because they don't want to stop. Their mindset is now flipped to where they have such a lust for something that when I talk to God about it, he considers them eunuchs because they can't have natural relations. Their minds they're just irredeemable. And they're serial killers because from a child standpoint, again, it's physical and mental torture. And the body memories that I talk about to this day. So as an athlete, I see a sports nutritionist once a month, and she'll do a pinch test and we'll look at fat, fat loss, fat gain, muscle loss, and I'll just adjust my program. And whenever I have a severe body memory, so she does not know about my trauma background because I want her to stay in her lane and not let that distract her professional results. And maybe it wouldn't, but that's just what I've decided. And when I have a really severe body memory, within 1, 2, 3 days, I will instantly lose 8 pounds of muscle just like that. And I'll put on 8 pounds of fat just like that. And it's physically impossible, except she's described it. I remember this has happened several times because I've seen her since 2015. When I go in to see her, she'll say, Lynn, and she'll laugh. She'll go, wow, it's as if your body thinks it's dying. Well, it does. Because every time a child is physically and mentally tortured, their little bodies interpret it as I'm being killed. Because again, they don't fathom all this adult stuff we talk about. I speak for the little ones. They're so teeny mentally, physically. That's how their mind and body reacts. So when I have a body memory that throws me back into those 0 to 5 years, it reacts again as if I was there reliving everything, and my body starts shutting down to survive. So that's proof. That's proof that the little ones, from their perspective, they think it's attempted murder. I want to change the terminology of this whole topic because so that's why I'm very much for those reasons for the death penalty too.
Well, as you stated, okay, chemical castration does nothing.
Mm-mm.
Okay, because we're not talking about child sexual abuse.
That's right.
We are talking, in many ways, physical murder of these children,
Yes.
as well as emotional murder of these
Yes.
children. So, no, chemical castration doesn't do it, because if the person lives and gets out, as has been the revolving door system of our justice system,
And justice system.
exactly.
Yeah,
We don't want these people ever out on the street again.
that's right.
Let's get in a little bit to the organ harvesting.
Okay.
When you look at organ harvesting, and people, I think that's one of the hardest things people can understand to a certain extent, sexual abuse of children. They can understand the sick minds that it takes to do that, et cetera, but I don't think they totally grasp the ideas of the adrenochrome harvesting or the organ harvesting. To a certain extent, that still remains a quote unquote conspiracy theory. But when you look at it as a survivor of this and the things that you've seen and you recollect, were there particular ages or particular sizes of the children that they saved for organ harvesting above and beyond the testing that they did? Were there particular ages? Did you have to be a particular age in order to generate that much adrenochrome, or where your organs are sustainably transferable to another living being?
The adrenochrome harvesting can be done on any age child, because you terrorize the child to where the body produces more adrenaline and creates the adrenochrome, which, by the way, I want everyone to know that 3M owns the patent for adrenochrome. You can look it up. So they can be any age, and you can see that as a side note, the use of adrenochrome, I want people to start paying attention to the commercials on TV. And I want you to notice, even our entertainers and performers in their 40s and 50s, when they should start having wrinkles like around the eyes, they don't. That's adrenochrome. So we need to start recognizing what it is and what's going on. The organ harvesting, I did not see any of that in babies. So probably maybe at least 2 years old is an educated guess. And from when I was little, the age of the children who were being harvested probably went up to maybe 8 or 10 years old, and that would be it. But first they would be harvested for the adrenochrome as much as they could, and I know it's hard for people to comprehend. So a couple of thoughts here. This Our government is the largest trafficker of children in the world. The number one reason for trafficking, which includes organ harvesting and adrenochrome harvesting, is money. Money. Just straight up follow the money. And this is more profitable than drugs, because drugs can be used once. Children, this can happen to them, the physical and mental torture, 20, 30 times a day, day after day after day after day after day. And then they'll get to some point where the adrenochrome harvesting and the organ harvesting will happen. They would also do skin harvesting once they were gone. And, you take that back to the Holocaust and those horrific lampshades and things that we all saw. So this is Operation Paperclip and infiltration of the Nazis. But it all comes back to money is the number one thing. Trafficking is a huge money-making event. Adrenochrome is used so prolifically by politicians and entertainment. It's a drug that's very much sought out. And then the organ harvesting, it's all for money. And a lot of this money funds our deep state. which is why I think Doge is such a beautiful thing, because they're going to drill it right down to the trafficking. That's the core of all of this funding. And that's going to, whenever we go into QFS, that's going to stop a lot of this, because they can no longer do all that dark money exchanging. So if people will think of it more in terms of the biggest money-making scheme that our government has ever come up with, that's what this is about.
Now, I want to backtrack a little bit, because you brought up an interesting point with 3M owning the patent on adrenochrome. I know you're not a scientist, but would adrenochrome not be considered a naturally occurring substance?
So I'm not a scientist, but I have an extremely high intelligence level. And so what I did was, when I started tracing through this adrenochrome, and I discovered that 3M had the patent. Matter of fact, so SG Nun's a friend, and I think he had that in a show. I think this is what started me down this path, or maybe he, posted it on X or whatever, Truth. But so I pulled every document about this adrenochrome harvesting in 3M and how they did it. And they have formulas, and they'll talk in depth about how they added this certain product to it, but it made it too red. And so people weren't maybe likely to take it because it looked too much like blood. So then they figured a different chemical product to put. I mean, it was just the links that they went to until they got it just right was just horrific to read. This cold, calculated, it's like, let's forget that this all comes from torturing children to death. Let's figure out how to make this happen so we make a profit. 3M, there are articles on 3M being called to the carpet on this by different news agencies. And their spokesperson's like, well, you know what? We didn't really know what that was. We just really weren't aware, but we don't know why we got the patent. That was and before we all came out of MK Ultra, which really happened during COVID, because so many people would have just been like the zombie robots under the MK Ultra mind control. Yes, 3M did not know what they, and moved on. But now too many of us are awake and realize that that's ridiculous.
This is exactly why we're doing what we're doing right now, because people can't be asleep anymore.
That's right.
Now, obviously, money is the big factor as to why this gets done. Money and power have always been the root of evil throughout history. People acquire the money through whatever means they do. Then they go after the power. And once you have the money and the power, unfortunately, your mind seeks other pleasures, usually not the healthiest of pleasures, mentally or physically. And so this power trip and this abuse starts to come from that. Were the bulk of the people who were doing this, and the people who were, we know the people who were involved in the science end of it with the organ harvesting, et cetera, were of a particular type. But were most of the people who were involved in the sexual abuse, the pedophilia, and the slave trafficking, people of means?
Some yes and some no. I'll start with the trafficking house. The people who lived there were insane to have such a thing going on. They were everyday people. No, I think that the grandfather was ex-military, but I don't think that meant the military was involved, although I'm not sure yet. So, but they were everyday people. The people who went to the trafficking house were everyday people in the community. The doctor who would come and administer drugs to the children. I remember having spinal fluid, spinal taps, because, so anyway, but they were people in the community that were just your business people, your leaders of the church, the, the area doctor, the area businessmen and women. So this is women, mainly men, a lot of women though too. And then that would branch out to higher level people coming in, those, higher level politicians, higher level law enforcement. And then so it became more regional, and they were all Luciferian satanic pedophiles. So there were satanic ritualistic abuse activities at this local and regional level. And so they get a little bit higher up the totem pole, so to speak. By the time it got to the university, now we're talking about the CIA was there, which they've admitted themselves to Congress. It was the 70s or 80s where they said that they were experimenting, on Americans, and, oops, sorry, never mind, didn't mean it, and got a slap on the hand and went right back to it, and then started in with the children. So the CIA was there, and then the higher level government, so now you're just going up the totem pole at the university. Then you'd have higher level doctors involved and medical staff. With the documents that were released, that the CIA, everything that they were admitting to, that were recently released in December that I was talking about, they had this information in there that they said when they were trying to recruit doctors, the people they were most interested in were the doctors and medical staff at the very top levels of their profession. They wanted the best of the best. And that at first, when they started, some were like, well, isn't this like an ethical, but the majority were like, yes, I'm willing to do this for science. I'm willing to do this for big pharma, because some of the experiments were to develop the big pharma drugs we have now, where they would slowly kill a person to make it last as long as possible, to get as much money as possible. So yes, the higher up you went. And then I also went to national satanic conventions. They have conventions like we do, but they're very, very different. And there's a below ground. And at that place, the highest echelons of the Luciferian satanic leaders were there. And these were scary, scary, scary people. I mean, scary people.
See, now this is the whole thing. Now, first of all, basically what you did describe is these are people of means. We're not talking your average farmer or blue collar worker or this or that or the other. We're talking people of means. Even the standard people, as you describe them, who owned the house where this was being done, they weren't doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. They were getting paid for this.
That's exactly right.
So everybody was either making money or paying money.
That's right.
For the services that they were receiving. So there's no, let's not mince words and make this, they were the kindly people in the house next door were running this. These are just as evil as the people participating. Now, when you go back and you look at this, and you look at the children who were taken, and especially when we get into the discussion of SRA.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who didn't see the episode with Rachel Vaughn, SRA, Satanic Ritual Abuse, this is, again, even beyond what we're talking about with people who are pedophiles and
yes.
people who are the sickness of a Dr. Mengele. These are people who are totally immersed, basically, in satanic worship, and will use these children not only for sexual rituals and rites, but also for sacrifice.
Yes.
What kind of experiences were those?
So first of all, I do think Mengele was a Satanist, and I think Hitler was too. So just, that's from my research, I believe they were. But so these people at the local level, which would be kind of like local, regional, what I found was, and this is how I'm going to describe it, the men were what I would have called geeks in high school. The women were mean as snakes. I mean, they were vicious and very much in charge of everything, and no nonsense, matronly, horrible people. But the men, they were like these submissive little geeks to these women. That would have been locally and regionally. And they had, just like the pedophiles, I mean, zero compassion for, none of them had any compassion, but the children were a means to an end, because it was the ritualistic abuse and the sacrifices. They're worshiping. So just like people of faith might go to churches on Saturdays or Sundays or whatever to worship, and that's like a normal thing that you do all the time, and that seems like a normal thing to you. So them going out into barns and the woods and other hidden places to do their ritualistic ceremonies and sacrifices of children is the same thing, but it's to Satan. And then at the national level, it just gets even uglier and more, um, a lot more children, and a lot more horrific worship practices. And I hate to use that word, but I mean, they're worshiping Satan. That is their God. And so many of them too have sold their souls to him in exchange for something. So he's given them something, and they've in turn exchanged their souls, because they're truly soulless people who do this. They're gone. They are not like us.
See, what drives me nuts is the premise and the mental state that these people have to be in. Because do they just believe that they're going to receive these gifts, or do they experience any kind of reward other than internally for what they do? And as a part B of that question, and as an HR consultant, do you believe that these people were also victims of either child abuse or satanic ritual abuse?
I would say bottom line, likely they are victims. For example, pedophiles don't just pop up in their adulthood. I mean, it happened to them too. None of it excuses the behavior, because they're grown adults and they can now make their own choices. But yes, I agree with that. And so I'm sorry, I forgot your first question because my HR hat kicked on to answer your second question.
The main question was basically, are these people of the mindset that they not only believe that there's this divine end to the sacrifice that they're making, or can they account to the fact that they've actually received what they've sold their souls for?
So they've received, and I'm going to use Taylor Swift as an example. I believe it's her dad or her mom is the head of the Church of Satan here in the United States. And so either her mom had a relationship with him, or I can't remember how it went. But then she was brought out on stage, all purposely done as an innocent, and then to get popularity. And then the year, I don't know if it's because I don't follow this woman, but it was either last year or the year before when she started dating that football player. And then all of a sudden, and I noticed it just in my everyday life, she was everywhere. I went to the grocery store and every magazine had her on the cover. And every movie I watched, like I was watching a Hallmark movie, and they're all saying that they're Swifties. And I thought, well, what the heck, you know? So what was happening though was, and she's also a witch. And so what's happening is, she was promised that in exchange for this illustrious career by the world's eyes, that if she worshiped Satan, she would receive that. So they are able, and I don't understand how that works, but they are able to receive things for a limited period of time, but they know that they've sold their soul to the devil. And in the end, he may promise them things when they die, but so I feel a story coming up. I love stories. When I was little, God took me to hell, and there was the doctor that would administer the drugs to the children, and just as evil as he could be, the things that he would do to us. And I saw him in hell, and he was on a spit, that you put a pig on. And there were two demons, one on either side, roasting him alive with these flames, and just laughing, if you can call a demon laughing. And every time the demon would spit, gasoline came out of their mouth and the flames burst higher. And he was in so much pain, he couldn't scream anymore. That was his forever. So whatever Satan's promise to them, he's the father of lies, are not going to receive it. They're, in the end, God is absolutely good, and he is a God of justice with a capital J. And whether they receive justice on this earth or the next world to come after this, they have sold their soul for immediate, what they consider pleasures in this world, but they're very short-lived. They do receive them, for the most part, it appears, but it's very short-lived.
You spoke about the drugs that you assume that they were doctors administered.
Yeah.
What kind of drugs were they administering, and what was the purpose of it? And were they administering them blanketly, or were there particular age groups that they were administering the drugs to?
So, for example, so I'll talk about the child trafficking house and then the university. So in the child trafficking house, a lot of the, not a lot, some of the customers liked the children to not be able to move. And so spinal shots would be administered to paralyze the bottom half of the children. So that's one example. At the universities, there was a lot of drugs administered for experimentation for different purposes. Some of it was to create drugs for big pharma. Quite a bit of it is, I have to laugh. Above ground, they'll say, we never experiment on children, so we can't say, that's just a crock, because they experiment on children all the time. They did during COVID. There's records. Parents received money to have their children administered the vax. But anyway, another story. So underground, some of it would be for big pharma. And I remember them killing me once because they tried to see how much of a drug they could administer before a little body would die. And one time they killed me because I remember being rushed in a gurney, flying down the hallway, lights overhead. Normally these rooms were dark, lights overhead. And I was above my body, and I knew I was dead. And frankly, truth be told, it was a relief because the pain was finally over. But they brought me back to life. So it continued. But they were experimenting, so now we have these deadly, they call them this child vaccine schedule. These are death shots. And they were developed and determined through children like me underground, where they would see what they could administer and how much to cause what effect. The whole time I was under there, I would have on a hat, Operation Montauk, where there'd be wires and things coming out and people watching monitors, just like you'd see in an ICU unit, where they would administer different drugs and watch the reactions. And then other drugs they would do. Every time I was there, I would have to tell them out loud everything I remembered, everything. And it was so torturous, the things that they would do to make sure I said everything out loud. And they'd have me on a monitor, and when they would see the part in my brain with the memory, they'd fry it with electricity to try to erase that memory so I could never speak, but God, military people will talk about this too, how that's happened to them. But, they didn't figure on my God, on our God. And God can do anything. And I have my memories, they're mine and they're precious to me. And I value each and every one. I document and record them as they come to mind, because it's me, it's my life. And they tried to take it, but God, I am remembering. But that was another reason. Of course, that wasn't a drug, that was the electrocution part. But
I mean, it's mind-boggling. It truly is mind-boggling. The man's inhumanity toward man. That there are enough sick people out there that even attempt things like this. When they would run these experiments, Was it almost like you used to see in the old movies, in the old hospitals where it was rows of beds or rows of gurneys, or in an orphanage where you saw rows of bunk beds or gurneys and this and that and the other, and they just had everybody laid out of varying ages, ready to either terrorize them or rape them or harvest their organs? Or was it done in operating rooms? Or how did they do this?
The children that were going to ultimately be executed due to this, and by executed, I mean they died because their bodies couldn't take it anymore. They were rows and rows, and just picture row after row after row after row in a huge, huge room of children on these surgical metal gurneys, tables with the tubes and things coming out of them. Children like me who had a home to go to, it was all in one giant room still, but more segregated into spaces where there was enough room. I remember flat screen TVs on the wall, and this would have been before they were technically, that we all knew above ground, were invented. So a lot is being withheld from us that is already available. But there were flat screen TVs, government employees watching behind there. I would have to presume it's the CIA, since they're the ones admitting to everything, but I don't know which agencies could have been in addition to the CIA. But there was it would be like surgical rooms, a good idea, but without walls. And they would have us in dental chairs where they would administer. And then, so I would be laying on a dental chair, and there'd be a doctor, there'd be a nurse or two, a technician, the CIA, the government agencies, the flat screen TV, where others would be watching. And so it's unfathomable. I know this is, hard for everyone to listen to. I understand it. It's hard to discuss, but God wants people to know. We people have to know what's happening to these little ones. These people had no emotion. So while they were electrocuting me, administering drugs, physically and mentally torturing me with their sadistic acts, during all of that, they were watching monitors and taking recordings, and it was just a giant experiment. It's unfathomable, their complete lack of compassion at all, while you could hear the children, if they had any screams left, because they don't use anesthesia. Now, I do like to give some hope. I'm an extremely spiritual person because of my childhood. I do want people to know that every child had an angel. I saw angels all the time. I still do. And the angels that helped the children were female mothering angels, very beautiful female angels, beautiful flowing gowns. And the little girl in me would call them the shh angels, as in they're there. And each child would have one. They were very mothering. And I had one too. And it's almost like by their touch, it would help soothe the pain some. You still had to experience all of it, don't get me wrong, but it would just help. I firmly believe those are the same angels that were with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, because he said he could have called a legion of warriors and he didn't. But I do believe he was soothed there. So there were angels. I just want people to know, we weren't alone.
But I have to touch on one point that you mentioned, and you're not the only one who's mentioned it, almost without pause. Kathy mentioned it. Rachel mentioned it. There are those who had homes to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I heard and understand what you said at the top of the show. And no offense to you or your family, but what kind of mindset, what kind of parent, what kind of mother allows their child to be on an ongoing basis for a period of 5 years, an infant, taken into situations like this, abused sexually, operated on, possibly never coming home again. And then on top of that, and I understand that you also said that there was law enforcement that was aware of it and involved in it. Where are the reports when these kids don't come home?
The reports. So the children who had homes to go to were treated differently so that they could go back home. And the ones that didn't have homes to go to, there was no record of them anyway, so they could do whatever they wanted to do. So reports, so much gets buried. It's a topic in itself. Our judicial system is extremely corrupt, and there are good people everywhere, but there are enough bad people to where I will tell people, if whatever's happening in your world, if you can stay away from law enforcement, out of the judicial system, you'll be a lot safer, and so will whatever child is that you're trying to protect. I know it's unfathomable for people about the family situation. You're right, Kathy will talk about it, others. For me, my mom hated me from the time I was conceived. I'll never know why. She passed a couple years ago. Now, because of generational pedophilia on her side of the family, it does seriously mess a person up. Just to say it, I mean it. And how some people come out of this after a lot of work, like myself, and some come out like my mom. I don't know. But she was very, very injured by this. And I have long since forgiven her. And as a matter of fact, several years before she passed, she was taught, this was before most of my memories came back. She was asking me, she said, I'm afraid when I die, I won't go to heaven. And I was surprised, but now I understand exactly why she said that. And so I led her to the Lord Jesus Christ. Never knew if it took, because she treated me awful my entire life. She was very verbally, emotionally abusive. And so the more I remembered, I protected myself. I forgave her, but I protected myself by staying far away from her, because people have to earn their family titles. Mother is a title. You have to earn that. Father is a title. You have to earn that. They don't just come with these automatic kumbaya sorts of things. But whenever she died at her funeral, my little nephew at that time was 4, and he came up to me. He said, "Lenny," and that's what they call me. He said, "You know that lady in the box," which would be Mom, because he's 4. I mean, that's what lady in the box, right, in her coffin. And he said, "She's standing right over there." And he said, "She's got a big angel on this side and a big angel on this side." So I knew that she was in heaven. But I also know the day she died, I didn't know what to feel. I had no idea what to feel. And granted, to survive, I had to stop feeling, because the little ones that felt, they died. Their little bodies and minds couldn't take the horrors, and some just died on their own, with no one actually murdering them, because they just couldn't take it. And so I wasn't sure how to feel when she died, and I was working on getting my feelings back at that time. But I just didn't know. So I asked God how I should feel. He has such a sense of humor. He said, "Ding dong." Well, I had Oz programming. So, so he knows how to speak to me. Our relationship with the Lord is different for all of us. He speaks how we can understand. And so, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." That song from Oz. And so I thought, okay, so I'm to kind of like rejoice. So I started singing, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." And it felt strange, but I thought, okay, if this is the right emotional reaction. So after that, I went to my therapist and I said, what? God said, and she started laughing. She goes, "Oh, yeah." She said, "Every person, when their perpetrator is," because Mom's the one that sent me there, although she didn't do those things. So my therapist said, "Every perpetrator, when they die, the victim is free. They're finally free, because that person, even though intellectually I knew she was an elderly person and couldn't hurt me, but inside in the subconscious and all, still would struggle with that. So, ding dong, the witch is dead, which is another reason why I'm for the death penalty, because that's whenever the victims truly have freedom. It's when the perpetrator can no longer hurt them.
Now, you stated that your mother was, quote unquote, injured by this. In what aspect?
I was mentally, psychologically, because I would use the word insane. Any human being with the label mother or not, but especially with that label, would have to be insane to let their little baby go to a child trafficking house and then be experimented on. I have a memory of her, they called it camp when I went to this university. I remember her writing the man a check to take me to camp. So she hated me so much, they didn't even have to pay her, although I know they did too. She paid them to take me away, so that she could pretend that I was going to camp when this government employee put me in the car and drugged me and drove me to the university. So insane is the word that I would use, because no one would do that. I mean, it is unfathomable, but unfortunately, it happens. I'm not the only one who will share this sort of story.
Now, again, no offense. Where the hell was your father?
So he was, it's an excellent question. He was an alcoholic and a workaholic. So he was never home. And never home. So he had no idea what was going on. He was not involved in the care at all, in my care as a child. He was gone either mentally because of that chemical and or physically because of work. So just very absent.
And you never came home with any markings on you or signs of abuse?
I would have, yes. The markings, most of them would have been hidden by diapers and, and again, he had no care of me. So that would have been mom. So she would have seen it and not cared.
Wow. Wow. Now, this is not just obviously a United States problem. This is a global issue.
Yes.
Something that goes on in every country. You stated the United States is the biggest trafficker, but it goes on all over the world and has been for centuries. When you talk about universities, does this happen strictly in United States universities, or does it happen at universities globally?
Globally. And the reason why is the tunnels are global. So the vast majority, if not all of the universities have tunnels, and that would be in other countries too. This is a worldwide event. And even though the United States federal government is the largest trafficker of children, we're also the international hub. So we will import them in. Recently, there was news that came out where Greenland is such a um, hub for the international trafficking of children, and how Putin has a special task force who's going in the tunnels to find the children, and the horrific effects it's having on the soldiers. I've heard reports of that from Ukraine too. But there are just tunnel systems everywhere. They go in the universities. Derek Johnson will talk about, in his book, The Midnight Rider, how DARPA, I think it was 2019, don't quote me on it, but requested money to go under the tunnels of the universities in the United States for tunnel warfare. So,
Well, subterranean warfare is something that we know that the military has been dealing with. They were trained in it for multiple reasons, because there are also DUMBs, at deep underground military bases,
yes,
that are out there. So there are people that do fight back. But this systemic and ritual abuse going on underneath our universities, that are being so endowed, and thankfully Doge is going through that, and presidents dealing with them also over
Exactly.
other topics. They had to be aware of what was going on underneath their esteemed universities. What culpability do you find these places had in this ritualistic child abuse?
This is crimes against humanity. They're very culpable. And for the audience to even understand, you did the wonderful show on COVID recently. I mean, you've done several, but the culpability of the COVID vaxes, people knowingly giving that genocidal drug to people, or the remdesivir. You know, they knew the remdesivir. I mean, studies have been done where when they gave remdesivir, I believe it was in South Africa, it had a 53% kill rate. So what the heck? I probably learned that on your show. I don't know. It was very informative when I was watching it. It's like, what? You know? So they're very culpable. I mean, they people know this this love of money, possibly blackmail, this furtherance of science. You know, again, in the CIA documents that were recently released, they were able to easily recruit the top medical professionals in their field to do this horrific experiments on the children and adults. And the reason they could was these top medical professionals in their field said anything to advance science, anything to advance big pharma. They are not like us. We the people do not think like. So they are very culpable in this. It is crimes against humanity. I know for the part of the children, there is no statute of limitations, no statute of limitations on heinous crimes against the children. And praise God, because justice is coming. You know, I've watched President Trump fire. I wondered how he would do it, but I knew he'd have to eliminate all of our systems, tear them down, and rebuild them. So I watched him fire a bunch of federal judges, federal attorneys, and I thought, okay, this is how it's done. And then I watched Kash Patel disperse FBI to all these local places. And as an HR consultant, I know it's very easy to go into a company and see who are the good ones and who are the bad ones. I mean, that can be done. So I believe, you know, with the plan before Trump took office, they knew exactly who the good FBI people were, who were left, and who the bad ones were. And so I believe that's for justice to start being done at the local levels too, because our justices have been selected, not elected. And of course, the maritime judicial system too, there's no justice there.
Well, this is something and a whole other topic, but it's something that thankfully is being addressed, and thankfully there is no senior moment,
Statute of limitations.
limitations
Yep.
on this, because no matter when it was done, no matter how long ago or how recently, these people need to be brought to justice, and justice has to be just, biblically just. Now, we know that, and we learned again this past weekend, that University Chapel Hill was very, very big in the creation of COVID.
Yes.
And furthering the distribution of it. These universities, how high up their hierarchy, or let's put it in the opposite direction, how low do you think knowledge descends? Do you think that there are just the board members who are aware of it? Do you think the deans are aware of it? How low do you think knowledge of these actions descends? Because again, we're talking about culpability here, and it's crimes against humanity, violations of Nuremberg Acts. There are a whole bunch of violations that have occurred through these actions. How far do you think it descends?
All up and down the chain of command. I believe the bulk of it's at the top on a need to know basis. And I believe probably everybody at the top knows, or the majority. And then below that, it's a need to know basis, but people will need to know. I think it's important to keep in mind a couple of things. Through Operation Paperclip, our universities were infiltrated by Nazis. So that's the first thing to know. And now we're into probably the third generation, possibly. So that's part of how this can happen. The other thing is with the CIA documents that were released in December, they will talk about the funding. So our government funds the universities, and this thing with money, people, money, money, money. I just, I watch myself get sold for money. I have a whole different take on money than most people, because the love of money astounds me, what people will do for money. I just, they can't take it with them. I have no idea why they treasure it so much for this short time on earth. The things that they think it can buy them, I'm astounded. But they're funded by our government. And so to get that money, they're willing to do whatever they're told and justify it, just like the hospitals did, just like the funeral homes did, whenever they were pulling out those white fibrous clots from COVID and not telling anyone. I mean, it just follow the money, which again is why I love Doge. So I think it's top to bottom, but the lower down the totem pole, the more it's a need to know, unless someone is super excited about getting involved, like the CIA agents found to do the experiments underground at the universities. And unfortunately, there's too much of that too, and still is.
Now, not that I would expect you to necessarily be able to discern the difference at that age or recognize at that age. You've already stated that there were government officials that came down, that not only came down to witness, but also came down to participate.
Yes.
Do you think that there were also university officials that came down to witness and participate in both the experimentation, like people in their medical programs, or, just people from the boards and this and that and the other who got their rocks off with little kids?
There might have been around. So the people not on the flat screen TVs, I knew that they were government agency employees because they all dressed the same. It's like when we had the three-letter agencies that infiltrated J6. They dressed the same, so you could figure them out. In their little mob. So that's how the government was in the room, and it was easy to identify the doctors and the surgeons and the nurses and the med techs by the garb that they wore. Now, who was behind the flat screen TV? I always thought it was likely government agency people that were watching and observing the experiments, because that's who funded it. But it could have been heads of universities. That would be the only place that if they were watching, that's where they were, because I don't remember them being in the room. Now, that being said, I still have repressed memories come. So there's not a week that goes by that I don't remember at least one or more things that are my precious memories to me. As horrific as this is my life, and I deserve to know what happened to me and record it. So I would not be surprised if higher level university officials were there. I would think just out of flat curiosity, if anything, just wondering what was going on underneath their facilities, for Pete's sake. I think natural human curiosity at a minimum would take over.
Now, do you have any recollection whatsoever to be able to describe what these tunnel systems were like? Because we've all heard about, tunnels all over the world, not just below the universities, but running below our major cities, running cross country, running between countries, allegedly the tunnel between the Vatican and Jerusalem.
Yep.
That was for 150 miles lined with gold. All these different things. Do you have any recollection of what those tunnel systems were like. You know, when most of us think of tunnels, and I've been down in tunnels doing my job, even, you know, a defunct, the not Black Railroad, but the Underground Railroad, it's literally underground. That's why I couldn't think of the word. Underground Railroad under Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I grew up in Brooklyn, had no idea it existed until I happened to see the sign there for a tour. And I went down and did the story there. So people know that there are tunnels. And when they think of tunnels, they think of subway tunnels, or they think of even the underground tunnels in DC going from the different, the Senate building and the congressional buildings. What were these tunnels like? Were they just caves, or were they really almost like underground manufactured cities?
I would say more underground manufactured cities. They weren't caves. And I do believe when people think tunnels, they think more of like maybe caves they've explored, or pictures that a lot of times if you'll do a search online of tunnels, it'll look like carved out, like mining kind of thing. Yeah. So they're not like that. Very, very, very sophisticated. So with me being under the universities, there was still harvesting and organ harvesting and medical procedures being done. Not that things were sanitized, but they were sophisticated and nice. And they would have a lighting system, or else it would be pitch black, because I can remember some hallways where the lighting system wasn't turned on, and it looked like you were, you know, in a cave without lights on. But they're it's like being above ground in a facility, exactly like it, but you're below ground. When the attacks were in Israel in October, was it just last year? Was it the year
2 years.
before?
Yes.
Okay. So if anyone followed those pictures, they showed all the hospital facilities they have underground. And they're beautiful facilities that can easily take care of soldiers or anyone who's injured. So look up some of those pictures if you want some good pictures, because they look exactly like above ground. It's exactly like above ground, but it's not. So picture, you know, you're walking down a sidewalk above ground. Well, just picture that enclosed, you know, because they have tunnels to walk through, and then of course the tunnels for transportation too. But they're everywhere. They comb the world. They're under the ocean. If your followers will get an earthquake app, the majority of the tunnels are 6.2 miles down for whatever reason. You can track the war underground, and it'll say an earthquake, and look to see if it's 6.2 miles, and you can see where the war is, and it's everywhere. This is a worldwide event, and you'll see it with your own eyes what's happening or where it is.
And not to dredge up old memories or have you relive them or anything, but 3, 4, 5 years old, when they're not really hidden in your subconscious, except for the really horrific stuff, what kind of experiences do you remember occurring not only to you, but in and around you?
So some examples, and I'll try not to get too graphic, because I'm not sure people can take that. So, for example, at the trafficking house, there would be in the basement, there would be a room where, remember when I mentioned that old-fashioned washing machine? Okay. Or maybe it was the dryer, because you're wringing the material out. I'm not sure what you call it.
No, that's the washer, yeah.
Yeah. But there was a dark room where that was held, and children would be lined up to be tortured, putting their fingers through it. So one of the, if not the most horrific part of this whole thing, is hearing other children scream and waiting your turn. As a matter of fact, I would try as often as I could to take the place of others, because I couldn't, to this day, if someone is in pain or hurting, I have to do whatever I can to help them. stop that, because it's just it's unbearable to me. So you would hear that they would go in there, and of course my fingers wouldn't be smashed because I had a home to go to. But the threat of it, I was so teeny, I didn't know the difference. That, oh, they really want, I have a home to go to. I mean, you don't have that kind of thought process. You really think it's going to happen to you too. So I remember waiting there. The dragging my leg, remember I was telling you about? They had a row of casts of all sizes that they could slip on a child's leg so they couldn't run away. I can remember being buried alive. They like to bury children alive. And so they would do that in the backyard. And I remember I had a cat when I was little named Blackie because it was black. I mean, picture how little I was, Blackie the cat, right? And they hung Blackie from a clothesline and killed her, or him. I don't remember which it was. And made me watch that. And then they hung me on the clothesline. And I didn't know it was to not kill me, but it was part of the torture that they do to get compliance. Thinking, so they like to kill and maim and mutilate animals. Cannibalism, they like cannibalism too. I can remember being hunted at the trafficking house where men would line up and they would hunt you like prey. So those are some of the memories from the trafficking house. The issue is when grown adults with no conscience are given little children and permitted whatever their depraved, corrupt, debauched minds can think of, they can do, because there's no one to stop them. And so the sky is the limit, depending upon what they can come up with to do. And they can come up, it could be anything. And children can't fight back. So, if you fought back, things were even worse than before. So it was easier not to, better not to. You survived better if you didn't. But they could think of absolutely anything to do and be able to do it. And for the little ones, you just sat there in complete and abject and total fear 24/7, not knowing what was going to happen. I'll tell you, it's because of that. You started out your show asking me how my childhood helped me now. Because of that completely keen observation of every little move and word and thing that was done when I was little, that was to survive. And so I could predict what might come, as best as a tiny one could, what might come at me, what might come at me, and when it might come at me, based upon that, which those skills make me who I am today. Whenever I'm with anyone, I read people like a large print book under a magnifying glass. When I choose to turn that on, which I don't choose to turn that on all the time because it's a difficult way to live, knowing everything about a person all the time. So, but those are some memories.
Now, we're not going to get into, where in the world is Waldo, where you grew up or anything else, or where this all happened. But from what you described, this had to be a fairly rural area, because otherwise my next question would be, where were your neighbors? Especially while hunting parties were going on or hanging you from a clothesline. Where were the neighbors?
So this is any town USA, I'm going to say, and worldwide. But what I want to encourage people to do is open their eyes. Open your eyes and say something and do something. The neighbors had to know. People had to know. And I believe right now, if everyone thinks about their own neighborhood, think about some of the children you may have seen walking down the street. How are they dressed? How do they look? Do you see little children never coming out of their homes and you think that's strange? It's everywhere. And I think people are turning a blind eye, or a participant, or yeah, I think a lot of it's turning a blind eye.
Well, I was going to say, do you think that not necessarily being a participant, but as we've known in regard to our own government and their participation in certain things, do you think there were threats or blackmail going on with some of these people that, you open your mouth, you're next or your kids are next?
There would have to be. From during these years that we're all waking up, we're finding people at all levels, politicians, especially, we hear stories where their families have been threatened, there's blackmail. And so some people are turning a blind eye or participating because they are afraid that they'll be killed or that their family's going to be killed. So I do believe that there is some of that, yes, extensive blackmail. As a matter of fact, you'll have survivors like Kathy and like O'Brien and others like her, where they were used to put people in compromising positions where pictures and videos were taken. So that is a piece of it too.
Now, what you described before was above ground and the experiences that you had there. And just out of curiosity, before I move on with that, hung by the neck or hung like clothes?
So I was hung by my armpits. So so not by the neck, because that would have killed me and left marks. So it was by the armpits, hanging there with I won't say imaginary, but everything else, every other part of the hanging was like loose, and it wasn't going to hurt me. But as a little one, I didn't know that, So, so they tried to mimic what they did to my cat with me, but not fully, because it would have left marks. They're very good at what they do to not leave marks if they
But
can.
it stimulate enough fear.
Fear, complete fear, because there was adrenochrome harvesting at the trafficking house too. There was an adrenochrome harvesting room where the children would be chained to the wall, and the room would slope down with a drain in the bottom of it, because one of my jobs was to clean it. And so
Sick, absolutely sick.
mm-hmm,
Now, what did
yes.
you witness from your latter years, your older years, your memory years below ground?
So below ground, in terms of some of the things that they did.
Some of the things that they were doing below ground that you can recall, physically witnessing, not from your stored memory.
Yes. So physically witnessing would have been the what I've described so far, the tubes coming out of the children, the screams from the children, when they would finally die, I would see them begin to remove the skin from the children, and the sexual assaults were horrific, and frankly, below ground, they were part of the experiments, because you were always hooked up to wires and monitors. So they were studying the brain and how it worked, and in their attempts to control people, which is why, above ground, that's how we got to the point of COVID, because they'd learned enough tactics below ground to control the mind, that they knew exactly how to terrorize people above ground to get them to do things that normally they would never dream of doing, thinking it was keeping them safe and they wouldn't be killed. It's the same stuff, but mine was below ground. I can remember being having my eyes pried open permanently. Do you remember that Mel Gibson movie where they put toothpicks in his eyes? Gosh, what was the name of that? Anyway, similar, wasn't toothpicks, but if you have your eyes pried open like that, just imagine for any length of time what that would be like. Sometimes when the pain would get so bad and I would pass out, I know that they would take like safety pins, but thicker, and stick them in toes and fingers to try to get me back up. They like to put a lot of things under fingernails. They would do all sorts of sexualized types of experiments too that I would remember.
So these were essentially modern day medieval torture chambers.
That is a good word. You know, the word I use is Holocaust. It is a Holocaust of children down there. Just like we're heard in the concentration camps, it is no different. They have these, but these are the little ones. They can do anything they want to. And it is from Operation Paperclip continued through our government and the CIA from Hitler and Mengele, correct?
Mengele, yeah.
Man, thank you. It's the same thing. It's a torture chamber, but it's no longer medieval. It's sophisticated, you know, using today's technology, because above ground we're so far behind what they can do below ground, what they've hidden from us.
Now, from what you were just describing and the manner in which you described it, was this also kind of an introduction or a furtherance of MK Ultra?
It was all part of MK Ultra, because part of the torture was the mind control. How they were trying to figure out. This is all ultimately about the New World Order agenda. So they were trying to figure out how to control a mind to get the body and mind to do things it normally would not do. You know, how do you get there? So the drugs, the experimentation, the torture, the observing, the monitors. So then, for example, you know, COVID is what I go back to. They brought it above ground. So first in MK Ultra, they terrorize you so much that you start your conscious, free thought, analytical skills shut down because you are in fight or flight. So your subconscious is wide open for them to stir around in there and do whatever they want to do and figure out how to control behavior. So then they bring it above ground. And how did COVID start out? With the terror. You're going to die. You're going to kill grandma. Your family's going to die. My gosh, your pets are going to die. You know, we're all going to die. You know, and so people's survival skills kicked in, and the repetition. You know, mainstream media, the same talking points because of Operation Mockingbird that the government, you know, can do that to us now. So the same talking points repeated over and over and over. You're going to die. This is a crisis. And then people's logical, analytical, everything shut down. And their minds, they learn this underground with the children. Their minds opened up then to, you know, I will do whatever I have to. This is like the little ones. I'll do whatever I have to stay safe and keep alive. You tell me to do this, I'm going to do it. You tell me to not do this. And again, for them, it was more about the pedophile agenda. You know, I'll do whatever you want. Just stop this torture. You know, this is mental and physical torture. The mask, that was physical torture. That was torture. You know, it was absolute torture. I couldn't wear one because it took me back underground. But that's how COVID rolled out, which is why we have to fight with every breath of our being, you know, if they try to do something else, because it's not real. It is not real. We are part of a project, an MK Ultra project, which is part of the New World Order. They have all of this planned. They've been planning it for a long time. COVID was well thought out before it was brought above ground, along with like their death shot solution with the vax, because the children were experimented on and adults below ground so that they could figure out how much of a death shot to give, again, so it normally didn't kill them. It would maim them enough so Big Pharma could kick in and earn even more money as long as possible while people died miserable, slow deaths, because these people aren't like us. They enjoy that.
Well, fear is the biggest motivator in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the agencies, the criminals, And the powers that be use fear at every turn that they possibly can, because it is the great motivator. Fear and anger. But we went over before the size of the marketplace that's out there for organs, for body parts, for adrenochrome. And you stated that the U.S. is the largest trafficker in this in the
Yes.
world. We know there's evil everywhere. How large an industry is this?
It's the biggest industry we have on the planet. It's a huge money-making machine. Because it never ends. The number of times a child can be sold before they succumb to death or are killed, the number of organs in one body, the amount of adrenochrome that can be produced, even after death, the skin that can be, it is a huge money-making activity. And because it's so secretive, and God bless you for airing and showing stories like this, because they get away with it because it's so secretive, and people, it's hard to talk about, it's hard to listen to. I know, I understand. But that is what gives them power, because they can continue their dark, nefarious activities because of the unintentional ignorance of those above ground. But it is huge. It's what funds everything. When Doge gets to the bottom of it, they're going to find the funding source ultimately perpetually goes back to the child trafficking on an international basis, because there are hubs in the United States where the children are taken and dispersed international. We've heard about the shipping containers, on the coast. Alex Jones just did an expose on warehouses above ground. So there are places everywhere, like right in front of our eyes, whether it's a house in the neighborhood, an empty facility that's actually not empty. It's a huge money-making activity.
Well, that's where Executive Order 13818 comes in.
Yes.
All of those assets, which will greatly contribute to world wealth.
Yes. And money for the children for recovery.
Yes.
Now, my one of my websites is Q, as in the letter Q, and then grit.org. And God named that after that John Wayne movie, True Grit, with that little girl. Yeah, it resonates with me and the little girl me that survived. So before I started speaking, 2 or 3 years before, God was giving me a plan for aftercare of the little ones once they were rescued. And then for adults, I have so many adults that reach out to me because they're still wounded from what happened to them, and they haven't gotten enough help or the right help or whatever. But that money will be used to fund. And I know I'm not the only one with these plans, because people reach out to me all the time. They'll say, 20 years ago, God gave me a plan for this too. I mean, they're all over the world. So we have plans in place. And whenever the funding comes out through, whether it's reimbursements from Doge or the reset, whatever, then these things will all be funded. So that way the children, can be helped, and the adults with the little wounded children in them.
Now, do you think poverty is a huge contributor to a lot of these kids being taken, both willingly and unwillingly, and especially from some of the third world nations, and the kids that are coming across the border, et cetera, et cetera? Do you think that the poverty there is a huge contributor, and again, willingly or unwillingly, to their ability to traffic?
Poverty is a huge contributor, and that would be in the United States and internationally. With my family, very low income family, primarily, traditionally, men are wired in their DNA to be providers. But whenever you have a dad that's an alcoholic, still trying to work, it's just difficult. There's the money goes for the booze and whatever. So at the poverty level, there's so much alcoholism and drug addiction and mental illness from various things that are happening, probably a lot of it pedophilia, that they are easy targets. Internationally, it's the same. Internationally, it's more the parents selling their children to receive money to try to survive where they're at. You know, and there's no excuses for any of this, but it might help a person semi understand, you know, what's happening. Now, it's the evil also happens at higher, there's no income that isn't subject to the pedophilia, because pedophilia comes regardless of um, age or race or demographic, or but the trafficking normally comes in the lower income, getting back to money, trying to attack those who don't have it, or people who don't have it trying to get it by selling what they have, which would be their children, for trafficking.
Very sad situation.
Mm-hmm.
Very.
Yes.
So, as we go to wrap this up, what do you feel is the future in regard to this? What can, not even so much the future, what can people do now? How can they be aware and mitigate prior to all this coming to fruition? What's transpiring, you know, the situation of if you see something, say something. How can the average citizen help to stem this tide?
Yes, thank you. So with the limited time that we have, I first encourage people to go to my qgrit.org website. It is full of information on how to identify if a child's being trafficked, how to identify if a child's being abused. If you see a little one you love, when you identify the signs, what to do next. So all kinds of information there. But for today, Border Czar Tom Homan has deputized the end of February every U.S. citizen to find the missing children, for example, that have come across the border. And they say 300,000, but those in the know say it's more like 900,000. So there are a lot. And his recommendation is, if you see something, say something, which for this population is to contact ICE. Now, three-letter agencies are a problem to me and your audience that's listening. However, I will say this: trust the man, trust the plan. I believe before, this would be like Kash Patel and the FBI. Before Trump came into office, they knew who in ICE were the good guys and who were not. So on my website, there's a page on ICE's phone number. If you see something, say something. So if you see a child that you think is being trafficked, to speak up and say something to ICE. You can call in anonymously. You can fill out an online report anonymously, so you don't have to say who you are. But I think initially now what we can do is open our eyes to see the prevalence of it. And there are signs that I mentioned on my website that you can look for to at least first steps to know and be aware of what's going on. At that point, ICE is our go-to to take action. Other than that, if it's something that's blatant, like I was in a neighborhood one time and a car stopped that didn't belong in the neighborhood, and a man got out to take a little 3-year-old who was playing in her front yard. And luckily, the person that I was with ran over and stopped it, or she'd have been kidnapped. So this happens in plain sight. So if you can safely do something, do, like in this case. Otherwise, be aware, is our best choice now, and contact ICE. As Tom Homan said, he would rather have 1,000 calls that amount to nothing and save one child, you know, by call 1001, than not to have any. So that is our go-to right now. I believe soon it will get to the local level. I believe soon it will go to worldwide. I believe that's why the FBI is now in local jurisdictions to do this. But right now, I want people to be aware, and to also be aware with their little ones. 1 out of every 2 little girls is currently being sexually molested right now, or has been when they're teeny, and 25% of little boys. So when you're at Walmart or church or wherever you are, look around and know this. Keep your eyes open and be aware, because awareness is step one. And soon, I believe, we'll have systems other than ICE in place to take more action. What not to do not contact local law enforcement. The first thing you're going to want to think about is protect the children and justice, but there is no justice now, and there is no protection. Law enforcement will likely give them to child protective services. I call that child pedophile services. They are part of the problem. Don't go there. Law enforcement also has the ability to take your child and put them in a psych lockdown for 72 hours in most states with children who are severely mentally ill. You do not want that for your little one after they're going through this. Don't enter the judicial system. There'll be time for this later whenever things are turned around, but this is not the time. We, the people, can take care of these children ourselves. And I've listed on QGRIP different tools and information of what you can do yourself to help your own children, and to help a friend's child who you know is being assaulted. We can do this ourselves. We don't have to enter the corrupt systems at all.
Wow. 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 It's really, you can't go beyond that. You know, this is why you speak out about this. This is why I do shows like this. This is why I stated at the beginning of the show. Yes, it's a difficult topic to listen to. Yes, it's a painful topic to listen to. People remark sometimes about why I pause so much and why it takes me so long sometimes to get a question out. It's because I choose the right words. That's why I refer to people like Lynne and Rachel and Kathy, not as victims, but survivors. Mm-hmm. There's a manner in which we have to look at this, and it has to be kept in our face until it ends. And then it has to remain right here so that we don't ever forget and we don't ever allow it to happen again. None of what we're experiencing should ever be allowed to happen again. Lynne Scott Haggerman, I thank you very much for coming on and opening your heart and your thoughts to bring this to the people. It takes a lot of bravery to do that, and it takes a lot of guts to have survived what you did. And we're thankful that you're here to share with the people.
Well, thank you. I mean, God bless you for having me on, and God bless your listeners. Everyone who's listening, I know it takes courage on your part too, to hear this and to try to comprehend it. And I'm so grateful that to your listeners that they were willing to hang through the whole show and listen and try to understand, and comprehend, and become part of the solution, because we the people can do this. We do not need the corrupt systems. We need each other. And we need some tools, and we need some facts. We need some knowledge, and we can do this because the children need us. This is about the little ones. This is putting aside any differences we may have as adults, and it's time for the children. We need to focus on the children. They're our future, and they're the ones that need help. And I just, God bless you, Mark, for continuing to have this topic on, and for your beautiful audience that's willing to listen.
Thank you. This platform is all about unity, and that's what we have to start doing. I say it all the time, and I'll repeat it again. Get away from the selfish and go to the selfless. We have to work together. Put all of the adjectives and all the divides that my business put in your head and start working with your neighbor, because that's how we're going to get past this and ensure that it never happens again. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Claudia, Kat, Kerry, and Doug for their help. Never forget this, folks. Never forget this. There will be more shows about this because there are more and more survivors coming forward about it. It's important that we do this. And once we get beyond this war into the future, there are plenty of survivors that will need our help to continue to survive and move forward and contribute to society. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you again, Lynn. Everybody have a good night. We'll see you next week again on Respect. Good night, everybody.